I think having a role in this industry and internships, it kind of just like it makes me look at everything different. Like I go to the grocery store, I'm like, wow, like so much went into getting this banana here.
I think to your point, Sam, just the incredible amount of effort and like number of steps that it takes to get a product onto a shelf or to get things from A to B, right? To go from a manufacturing site to distribution is a lot of steps, let alone to the final like consumer.
Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we have a studio full of young supply chain professionals. We've got Sam Nunez from Procter Gamble joining us, along with Claire Konz from Miebach, and we're going to be talking and chatting a little bit about how and why they selected this particular career path and began their studies before COVID happened. We're in college during COVID, and the industry that they got dumped out into for their new profession. Welcome, everyone, to Speaking of Supply Chain. How are you guys today?
Good. It's been
Doing
a
great.
very busy week.
All right. So I am looking forward to this topic today. I think there are a lot of young professionals that are in the same shoes as you, and hopefully we can talk about some of the issues that you guys have been facing in your early careers. But first, let's take a quick break and get to know you a bit more. So we have an interesting icebreaker question that is brought to us by Claire today. What is the most boring fact about yourself? And Claire, since this is your question, I'm going to let you go first. What is the most boring fact about you?
Okay. I mean, we talked a little bit before the episode about how my favorite cereal is Cheerios, like plain. But I think another boring fact about myself is that I like my water room temperature. Like that's kind of a hot take sometimes. Like people like cold water, but I drink room temperature water.
You know, I remember reading in a girly magazine back in high school, it was probably Cosmo or something like that, that there was a celebrity, and I know who it is, but I'm not going to mention it. But she insisted that her water was room temperature and she would even take the temperature of it. But the reason was because room temperature water, your body absorbs it faster than cold water.
Look
But
at
on the flip side, so aside from hydration, if you consume cold or ice water, your body has to generate heat and use energy to warm it up so that you can digest it. So it's actually burning calories to consume the water. I guess that's two different potential takes on the temperature of your drinking water.
That's a good
that.
one.
Such a strange fact. Sam, did you have a boring fact about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's pretty boring. I like brew my own coffee, and I think yeah, I feel like everybody drinks coffee, and it's like not that exciting, but I really enjoy the process of just brewing my own coffee, like grinding my own beans and stuff like that. So that's
Okay.
that's my boring fact.
Are you a coffee connoisseur? Do you like particular beans, or you just fold yours out of a can kind of?
So I do go to like a local roaster and get beans. I wouldn't say I'm a
Okay.
connoisseur, not yet. Give me like 5 years, but we're getting there.
But still doing it at home so you get that cost savings and not
Yeah,
having to wait in line?
exactly.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm trying to come up with something boring about myself. I mean, I don't
You're
know.
just so
I
exciting, Ellen.
I'm such a thrilling character. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is I really dislike having painted nails.
Oh,
I do not like painting my nails. It's such a pain for me. I think part of that is because earlier in my career, in my early career, I was in the restaurant industry, and so we didn't often have painted nails or done nails just because it was a food safety thing. So I just got really used to not doing it. And then I had a family and I just never had time or the money to dedicate to manicures. Now I'll do my toenails, but my fingernails, I don't like having polish on them.
interesting.
So
I say that's a
random.
boring
I
fact. Yeah,
appreciate that.
No one cares about that.
I
That's the point.
I mean, every once in a while I'll get my nails done and then I'm like, okay, I'm over this. I'm ready for them to come off, or I'm ready, to take the polish off because it's chipping and it's just not worth the effort and the upkeep. Bleh. I got better things to do with my time.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. So let's get to our topic today. So, you guys are younger professionals in the industry, as opposed to myself, who's been around for a while. What made you choose supply chain or industrial engineering as a career? What appealed to you in, I guess, in high school that made that such an appealing career choice?
I could start. So I actually did not start heading towards supply chain until like a year or two into college, because when I went to college and when I started, I was going to be an aerospace engineer and I was going to work on rockets and satellites, right? Like
Nice.
that was my goal. And then I learned about industrial engineering because I didn't know anything about industrial engineering before my first year engineering courses. So when I learned about industrial engineering and how it's all about optimization and making things better, we used to have a professor who said, engineers make things and industrial engineers make things better. And I like that kind of mindset of continuous improvement and seeing what else can you do, how much further can you push the envelope. And so that is what got me into industrial engineering. Of course, I'm an industrial engineer by degree, but then my internships are really what pushed me towards supply chain, because I had an internship in manufacturing, but then my next internship was in a much more supply chain focused role. It was in a fulfillment center. And that is where I was like, this logistics stuff, this is really cool. So I want to learn more about that.
Sam, what about you? What drew you to this particular industry?
Yeah, so actually, kind of very similar to Claire. I was good at math in high school, so my parents always just pushed me towards engineering. And then Purdue had some sessions where people could learn about the different types of engineering. And during the industrial engineering one, the head of the department spoke a little, and kind of similar to what Claire said. He said, if you ever see a process or see a way of things being done and you think you could do it better, come to IE. So that
Mm-hmm.
kind of sent me down that road to industrial engineering in school. And then over the course of internships, I just found a love for logistics and supply chain, and kind of just, again, like Claire said, just getting as much juice out of the lemon that you can get.
I like that analogy. That's awesome. So you've both mentioned, first of all, starting your collegiate careers at Purdue. So I think we need to acknowledge that elephant in the room, boiler up. I went to IUPUI, so I got a little bit of both the Indiana schools. I don't profess an allegiance to either, but I can recognize that some of our listeners will have an opinion on that. But you were both in Purdue. It looks like you both graduated the same year in 2021, which means that you were in college during this whole COVID disruption that the world experienced. And that had to affect these internships that you guys are talking about. So tell us a little bit about what that was like, your second and third years into, studies and needing to look for an internship while the world is shut down. How difficult was that? And did that have any effect on what you were trying to accomplish getting toward your degree? Claire, do you have any interesting stories to share?
I think the one advantage of kind of when all of the COVID shutdowns happened was it was after kind of career fair season, right? So I was in a very fortunate position where I had gotten a return offer from my previous year's internship. And so I had kind of already had that lined up and ready to go. The biggest impacts it made for me were that internship was shortened a little bit. So instead of it being a 10-week internship, it was only 8. But I was very lucky to be working for a company that was still saying like, oh, we're going to do these internships. We're going to have to modify it, but it's still going to happen. My internship was supposed to be in Ohio, and it ended up staying at the Indiana facility. And so that was a little bit unexpected, but I'm glad that I was able to stay in that boat of still having an internship in 2020.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Sam? Did you experience any difficulties or um, hiccups in having that internship that you thought you might have, having a different role or a different purpose?
Yeah, luckily for me, I also avoided the hiccups. I also worked in a manufacturing site, and so I think I experienced something different than a lot of my other peers who maybe they're kind of more office or consulting jobs where you can kind of do more stuff remote. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of the biggest advantage of my internship that I was able to still be in person versus I know several other people who've kind of their internships either got canceled or they were remote, so they kind of didn't have that camaraderie in the office or in the plant like I did.
So the secret fun fact I'm going to tell you here, Ellen, is Sam and I had the same internship that year. We were in the same building.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I
Okay,
didn't
well,
know if I
so
should bring that up.
that wasn't expected, but that's okay. So, one of the other things I'm thinking about is during COVID, and I, of course, I was already with Miebach for a number of years by the time that all of that happened. My COVID experience was very different from a lot of people's because I was on maternity leave when all of that happened. And so I was at home anyway. That didn't really affect me all that much. But coming back to work after that was very difficult because in marketing everything is in person. And um, conversely, for you guys, when you were there in those production facilities, production was still a what was it they called it, an
Like
essential,
essential?
yeah,
Yeah.
essential position. Like that's not something that could have been done remote. My job could have been done remotely. And in fact, we did a lot of remote work for the remainder of that particular year. But for essential positions, in those factories, in those production facilities, you were still there live. And so you got the opportunity to have that internship still and do some of those things. So you didn't miss out as much as maybe some of your classmates did when they were looking into other non-essential functions in production or in engineering where they could have been just doing this remotely or doing something else other than what they had intended to do. You were able to continue on with your intention is what I'm hearing.
Right. I think one of the cool things to come out of the lockdown period was that it did kind of make a little bit more space for you to use your creativity and figure out what are you going to do, because you're not going to go out to a bar or something after work. You're going to, stay in and have a game night, or you're going to work on a new personal project or something. And it was a really different take on how you spent your personal time, even outside of work, and how you create that work bond as well.
Absolutely, because all of our circles got very, very small, and the people that you connected with, you kept it to those core people, those core individuals that you would see on a regular basis, just in case someone came down with something. But when it comes to what it was you thought you were doing, and we've established that you kind of chose this career midway through college, um, but that was still at the beginning of COVID and when manufacturing was a little bit different. Now I'm sure the manufacturing side of it hasn't changed as much, but I think about all of the things that we had pre-COVID, on the grocery store shelves. We had, 7 different kinds of Coke available. And now there are only, during that time, there were shortages on packaging. There were shortages on, the aluminum for the cans. And that's just one product. And I don't even, neither of you mentioned where you worked. So I don't know if I'm even in the right realm, but I'm going with what I remember. And some of those things are just not available anymore. Where they've stopped manufacturing things, they streamlined their product offering because COVID made it necessary. And then after the fact, they looked back at their business and said, is it really necessary? Do we need to bring this product back? So there were a lot of major business decisions taking place at these factories and production facilities to make what they could with what they had, and then to decide whether or not to bring these other products back. So Did that have any effect on what you viewed your potential career path to be and understanding what problems you were going to be solving?
I can talk from my experience. So I would say, um, looking back at it now, like now I can see how that affects things. Even in my current job, we're still kind of, to your point, like, do we need 100 different products when five could suffice?
Right.
And I think that gets down to one of my biggest passions in IE, which again is just like trying to optimize and say, hey, do we need to offer these, or can we just offer these five products at the best quality, always on time, always on the shelf? Um, and it did kind of feed into my internship, as my project was kind of related to, you know, more space not being available because of all the COVID kind of influx and kind of costs and stuff like that. So my internship project at that company was a direct result as of kind of what happened with COVID and projects being delayed. So it was um, super cool to experience that, and trying to again do the best with what you can and trying to find ways to make your current systems better.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we were in an e-commerce fulfillment center, so we had this problem of enormous demand, right? Because
Hmm.
everyone is shopping online, right? So, like Sam talked about, some of the problems where we didn't have enough space to put things, our returns volume went through the roof, and we were trying to
Yikes.
figure out how do you process that efficiently without having this huge effect on the current equipment. Um, and so that was definitely a challenge that was incredibly unexpected. But in terms of what did it mean for my future career, it really sort of showed how essential the supply chain is and how delicate of a balance everything is in, right?
Okay.
So it has this sort of ecosystem. As long as it keeps moving forward, we're good to go. But of course, those supply chain disruptions really highlighted, okay, where can we improve our systems? How can we add more robustness? Where can we make them better? And I think that for me just made it even more exciting to go into a supply chain oriented role, is to know that there are still bigger problems out there to tackle.
Absolutely. Well, and it sounds like your informal training there in those internships was even more valuable than the classroom work, because classroom was based on certain assumptions and certain standards, certain understanding of what the industry looks like, and out in reality in that facility, you learn something very different, that there are, disruptions that need to be accommodated for, and adaptations that need to take place. So it sounds like you're even more prepared than maybe some of your classmates that graduated the year before COVID and then were thrown into it expecting one thing and getting another.
Yeah, that change is between the classroom and real life is incredible, right? Because you learn all the theory, you learn all the equations, the sort of science behind best practices and general decision making, that kind of thing. But then when you go to actually put it in practice, you start to learn, what is it from your studies that is actually useful? How can I apply these different things? How can I tweak what I learned in theory to make it more applicable to reality? And
Hmm.
that's a whole other level of engineering challenge when you dive into the details of it.
So, what are some of those other soft skills that you guys maybe needed to tweak a little bit? Because you're talking about the technical skills development, all the math and things that you needed to learn in order to, go through the data and work on paper or on a computer to help with those aspects of the job. But when it came to, just live being in a facility, what kind of soft skills did you develop, knowing that you had to be 6 feet away from someone and with a mask on?
Yeah, for sure. I think it just kind of reiterated how important just people skills are and like relationship building. Um, Obviously 6 feet away, mask up, all that stuff, but you can still talk, and still, even that I think was better than being virtual, just because you still have that human presence in the near vicinity. Um, and to Claire's point about building robustness, so much of any supply chain is people doing manual labor still. There's
True.
still somebody moving either a pallet, taking something off a line. So at the end of the day, it still is people performing a lot of these um, jobs. And
Hmm.
so that's another kind of thing to highlight or kind of thing to improve is how do we get them to do their job better, or what can we do to make their life easier? And
Hmm.
that really starts with building a good relationship with people.
Well, and I know that was such a big thing during that time was, all of these frontline essential workers that we needed in those facilities. Those of us that were sitting at home and ordering online, to your point, working in an e-commerce distribution center, they were the busiest people out there. And well, aside from the ones making the deliveries. So, there were a lot of frontline people out there that were working amazingly long hours and so many open positions coming out and available to people who were sitting at home and out of a job because they were deemed non-essential. And so now we have all these new essential positions. So I imagine that a lot of what you were doing was working with people who were maybe new to the company or new to those roles. I mean, you're working as an intern, but they're coming in as frontline, basic entry positions to work in these facilities and support the massive operation that was going on to keep products, available to the consumers out there.
I think even we're seeing impacts of that still now. Like even in my current job, a lot of our sites are, and I think just broadly across the industry, is just new people. People retired because of COVID.
Hmm.
People changed or moved for family because of COVID, and so I feel like a lot of new or a lot of manufacturing companies are dealing with new people. So again, it's to the point of how do we make things simpler? How do we improve the supply chain through these people?
It seems like the robustness and the detail of a training program has become more important than ever because you want to make sure your people have the right skills for what they're trying to do. And
Hmm.
I even found that as I was onboarding here at Miebach, right, is what do I need to know to be able to do this job effectively and to be able to be in this role, even though it's not necessarily a manufacturing role, right? It's consulting, but there's still a key set of skills that you need to learn to be able to be effective at your job.
Hmm. Well, and I know one of the other things that has come out of COVID, because I've talked about it on other episodes with other guests, is the labor market and the constraints that are there. Given Sam, some of the things you were talking about in regard to early retirement because I can and might as well, or moving and going to live in different geographies. So there's been a lot of shifts in the labor market for the logistics industry. We've seen strikes in the past couple years. What does that look like in terms of your individual versus a company mindset? I know that a lot of younger professionals, the advice is, you need to be looking for a new role every few years versus those from my generation or even before, that they would come to a company and stay there for a very long time, and company loyalty was something that was maybe not expected but was more prevalent. Do you guys see that in your roles or in the jobs that you've had after college, that's a definite generational rift?
It has been really weird being kind of the like age that we are in coming into the supply chain industry while the labor market has been a little bit all over the place, right? Because
Hmm.
there have been huge swings between we don't have enough people and we have too many people in
Hmm.
all kinds of industries. I mean, you're seeing that with tech industry layoffs and you're seeing it with manufacturing not being able to hire enough people. And so it's really weird to be in that environment where that swing is really broad. Um, in terms of kind of what I guess, being told about the industry and kind of advice we're getting to be able to have the best career path, we are kind of getting that advice of changing your role kind of every 2 years, right?
Hmm.
And so every 2 years seems to be what's going to get you to move up the highest or the fastest, right? And to kind of help you make the most money. And so it's up to each individual to prioritize, do you want to work at the same company regardless of the role? Do you want to optimize your earning potential, right? Because it seems like, and in my experience, the fastest way to do that is to move roles. Whether you're moving up in your company or moving out to a different role, that's kind of the shift in the trend of how do I format my career, right? And so it's a little bit interesting to really reflect with myself and look at, okay, what are my values here? What is important to me here? Because at least for me, that hasn't been the pay, right? It's been a lot more about the environment, because I've worked in some environments where the work wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. Oh, and I've also worked in some environments where I didn't necessarily gel as much with the people. And the difference that those two things make on your quality of work life is enormous.
Absolutely. Sam, what about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely see people around me, friends, coworkers, moving like every 2 to 3 years, whether it's in the same company or different companies. Um, I think the biggest thing I've been seeing is just you really have to be your biggest advocate. You have to clearly and plainly talk with your manager, your two up, kind of what you want. And I guess, first of all, like Claire said, figure out what you want. Is it pay? Is it location? Is it a good team? Because those aren't all necessarily going to be in the same role or company. Um, but yeah, I think it's been a weird push, but I think it's a good push overall for people coming in and just starting their jobs to have that freedom and kind of it become more socially accepted to change companies if you're not gelling well or if you want something different.
Yeah, it is just a completely different mindset. I know when I was starting out in my career, and that was in restaurant management, and that was many, many, many moons ago. But the career advice that we were given back then was, be prepared to change jobs around 7 times in your working career. Well, now that's probably double, if not triple, for young individuals, given the time span. If you're changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, that's a lot of change. And that's even still further removed from perhaps my parents' generation, where you went to work for one company and you probably stayed there the entirety of your career until you were able to cash out your pension and go home and be retired. Of course, that also has to do with retirement age changing and people staying in the workforce longer. But at the same time, that's such a different mentality of, I need to keep learning. I need to keep adjusting what my capabilities are. I need to keep working on what I need to know next for that next role, for this next organization, in order to be on top of my game and keep my career moving in a forward progression rather than being stagnant. So what does ongoing education look like for you guys? You're not that far out of school. It's only been a few years into your first or maybe second jobs by now, with your new companies. So, what role does ongoing education play for you in your career journey or your planned path?
You're totally right with that, new jumping jobs every couple of years requiring so much extra skills prep or skills learning, whether that's soft skills or technical skills. It's a little bit all over the place. I think for me, being able to learn and grow and test my skills and expand upon them and have a little bit of autonomy is really important, because I learn best by doing, right? And seeing what's possible. Can I do this? Can I push this program or software to do this thing that I think it should be able to do, right? And so, but on top of that, I also really want to learn what I don't already know, right? And figure out, what is it that I don't know? What do I want to learn more about? What doesn't seem like it's for me? And have the flexibility to sort of play around in that sandbox and find something that is interesting to me that I want to run with as well, right? So even through this job, I've learned so much just from being on project work and having the different trainings that we get to go to. And I think it's really important that those trainings and those things that I've learned haven't ignored the soft skills, right? Because especially coming out of COVID and being new to the workforce in general, the soft skills that you need in business to be able to effectively communicate, to get your point across, to sort of influence people, whether you have any kind of like pull or not, is really important. And learning those on the job has been very effective.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of starts with being good at the base role. And then, once you kind of have your base role and your base roles and responsibilities down, you kind of just, I guess it's probably easier said than done, but just kind of explore what you can do beyond that. Um, I think Purdue has set me up well. I think my past internships have set me up well to ask the right questions or be curious. And so to Claire's point, I think after you kind of get your core down, you'll start asking, okay, like, what don't I know? Like, what part of this process am I just, pushing a button where I could learn more about what actually goes on behind the scene? So for me, a lot of kind of the stuff I do outside of my base roles have just been based on kind of things that I can see that need improvement, or things that people have talked to me of, hey, have you thought about making this better? Or can we try something new out? So that's kind of where I kind of try to grow outside of my base work.
So I know that for me personally, I've had a number of different base roles. I mean, if I started in restaurant management, this is clearly not a restaurant. So I've had to relearn, different roles and different skills over the years as I've fallen into the marketing role and really enjoyed that and built up that. But even then, marketing has changed so much over the past 10, 15 years that the things I initially learned have absolutely very little to nothing to do with what I do today. And the things that I'm learning now are weren't even heard of back then, like search engine optimization. When I went to college, that wasn't even a thing, and now it's been a thing, and it's a kind of a has-been thing now. So what do you think about your roles right now, what it is that you're doing? What do you predict is not going to be around in 20 years?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think you have to bring AI into this conversation, especially in a like kind of consulting role, right? Because how are you able to use different kinds of softwares, different programs, different artificial intelligence to do the data aspect of it, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my role is data crunching and currently, right? And so how can you use those softwares to do the actual data crunching, and then will they get to a place where they can find the meaning in that data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because data is information, right? But turning it into knowledge requires an additional deeper thought of like, what is this connected to? And
Mm-hmm.
so it would not surprise me to see data, like actual number crunching, leave the role, but have it turn more into a what does this data tell you kind of
Mm-hmm.
role.
Okay. Sam, what do you think?
I think for me, it's actually a scary thought. So I think we mentioned I work for P&G, so I work on the supply chain for for Bounty. So a lot of the decisions I think that I make, or parts of the job that I do, a lot of it is just due to a lack of connecting data, like just things that
Mm-hmm.
people just know because it's just not the most convenient to have data for it or to record it. And so I imagine in 20 years that a lot of the information that just because different vendors or different equipments or stuff like that, maybe in 20 years they'll have a way to just sync up all this data, and things that we work on my team to decide best kind of sourcing strategies for certain products that'll
Mm-hmm.
be more streamlined. And maybe AI will will take over my job in 20 years.
You know, as long as there is going to be a decision that has to be made, AI is never going to replace people. I've had this conversation on other episodes where we're talking about the artificial intelligence, and I I loved the Matrix movies. Those were so interesting, but we're never going to get to a point where people are just the batteries that are running the machines and the power source. That's the fiction part of science
Yeah.
fiction. But I love that we can still use that intelligence that can be harnessed and that is self-learning. So as these programs go through more and more data and they're able to say, okay, well, statistically, when we look at this batch of numbers and it does this over and over and over, we can extrapolate that that's going to be the ongoing trend. But at the end of the day, a human has to look at that data and say, that's right, this is the data trend, but that means I have to choose A or B. And A or B could depend on any number of different factors. It's not just the math. It's not just the trend. There has to be a human there participating in it, which means that the human has to level up too, to understand what that data means and to understand what the implications are of either the decision A or B. So I think that is where a lot of your roles are going to change with AI. But also another aspect of this is, the sustainability aspect in a lot of the work that we're doing. And we're trying to, to Claire's point, do things better, do things more efficiently, and do things with fewer resources or with less waste. And that's where a lot of the human element is going to come into it for those creative ideas of, what can we do? Where can we find a different possibility or a different option to go forward, that a computer's not going to have all of those ideas. It's not going to be able to look at everything and come up with a potential or a concept that is going to be nearly as good as a human with an imagination and eyes to look at what's going on. What do you guys think?
That's one of the things that excites me the most about the direction that computers and software and just computing ability are going. Is to be able to kind of make more time for the creativity, right? Make a little more time to be able to look at things from more angles. And oftentimes the top constraint on a project is time, because you only have so much time before a decision deadline or something has to be done or something needs to get started. And so to be able to have more space to use the creative part of your brain and to think through a solution from multiple different angles and look at, what if we try using this in this different way? Like, do you think that would work? I think that is where we're going to be able to kind of skyrocket that innovation piece of the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I kind of had something like that pop up this morning, actually. Just trying to decide kind of, what product needed to be made at a certain manufacturing site. And just in my head, I was thinking, there's like 10 different ways we could solve this. But because of time and because of needing to produce the product, I couldn't go down all those different paths. So yeah, I think that when that comes, that'll be super. Hopefully I'm still working and still around then, but that'll be super fun to just either put in, for example, maybe saving CO2 emissions is your top priority, or fulfilling customer orders. Like being able to map out all those different variables is really exciting, and really excited for that to happen.
Yeah, and those variables are the decision pieces, because there are multiple, factors to every decision, and we have to weigh which ones are more important at that moment in time. The computer's never going to know that. It's never going to be able to prioritize that importance the same way a human is, by looking at everything on the table.
I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
computers are helpful for building out what are the scenarios that are possible, but then you kind of have to pick, what do I want to optimize for? What do I think is the most important to me?
Absolutely. All right. Any last thoughts before we close out for today?
I think this is a really cool industry to be in, simply because it's forever changing, right? Like we've talked about how it's changed. Just in Sam and I have only been graduated for 3 years, right? And even just in those 3 years, the different types of problems we're encountering and the just insane difference in how these roles have developed, how different supply chain roles have become available is so interesting. And so with that kind of ever changing environment, I don't anticipate really having a lot of boring days. So which I think just bodes so much better for the future of supply chain and being able to always find something that I'm interested in learning more about, interested in doing more with.
Absolutely. That should be one of the major speaking points about coming into a career in supply chain. You will never be bored. You will always have something interesting to do.
For
Sam,
sure.
Sam, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think having a role in this industry and internships, it kind of just like it makes me look at everything different. Like I go to the grocery store, I'm like, wow, like so much went into getting this banana here or whatever it is. Or now that I work in P&G, I like it's super cool to see all these different P&G products and kind of know all the work and all the people that made it possible to be in my local Kroger. So yeah, it's a super exciting industry and like super impactful. Obviously, everywhere, healthcare, food, clothing, anywhere, supply chain is involved.
It's absolutely surprising to realize, and I didn't experience that from your angle, but just from a consumer and then coming into this industry and realizing the scope that logistics and supply chain has on just everyday life that you don't even recognize. I mean, yes, you're driving down the highway and the semi trucks are going slow and you're annoyed by it, but then you start to think about what it is that they're actually doing, what they're accomplishing. All of a sudden, you're a lot nicer to them.
For sure. Or like if there's like some bananas out or some toilet paper out or anything like eggs
Yeah.
out, it's like, oh, it's such an inconvenience where like for those companies, it's like probably such a big like red flag. Like they're trying their hardest to get it on the shelves for you.
Yeah, they've got alarms going off and lights flashing.
Yeah,
Kroger doesn't
exactly.
have toilet paper.
I think to your point, Sam, just the incredible amount of effort and like number of steps that it takes to get a product onto a shelf or to get things from A to B, right? To go from a manufacturing site to distribution is a lot of steps, let alone to the final like consumer. And so when those disruptions happen, like, yeah, they're frustrating, but you also got to think that there's probably dozens of touches on that one item before it ever even hits the shelf.
For sure, for sure.
All the people throughout that chain getting yelled at that day because there's something not on the shelf. Or all the people sitting in an office trying to figure out how do we fill that shelf? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? That's where all of these people are connected and they come into the equation. And yeah, AI is never going to take over our jobs. I promise you that. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Sam and Claire, for sharing your experiences and insights with us today. I know I will have your LinkedIn links on the episode information in case any of our listeners want to get in touch with you and connect and maybe trade some more stories about their own experience coming up into this industry in the last few years, because it has been a wild ride. If any of our listeners out there have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me at podcast@miebach.com at any time. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer, or on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or Spotify. And be sure to tune in next time.